All right, well, we're going to talk a little bit about mobile today, and I'm actually going to begin with some stats. And part of the reason I want to do this is because if your organizations are anything like mine, I'm actually having a hard time convincing people that this is a big deal. And I'm flabbergasted by that because it just seems so obvious. And maybe it's the circle I travel in, but I don't think that's entirely true because, I mean, I've been in a lot of airports, I've been in a lot of different places, and all I see are people playing with their phones. You know, in fact, I just saw this. I was looking at Twitter earlier today, and in San Francisco on their BART system, their version of the tube, somebody was brandishing a gun, and nobody noticed because everybody was doing this with their phones. I thought, holy crap, we're so engrossed with our phones that we don't notice a guy with a gun. You know, so anyway, it took him literally shooting someone before people were like, oh wait, what's going on? You know. Apparently it wasn't on Twitter that there was a guy in front of you that had a gun. If it was on Twitter, they would have noticed. So I'll throw some stats at you, and those are largely US based. I apologize for that. It's hard to find international numbers, although one of the best analysts in this space right now is based here in London, Benedict Evans. I'll quote him quite a bit today because I find his stuff pretty much must read. So we'll talk a little about why this matters. I'll discuss mobile first, which is where I try to get my guys to begin. And this is hard because we've got a lot of groups that still think the legacy desktop is where it's at. And I think we're much better served if we start with the mobile solution and then go to the desktop. We'll also talk a little bit about some of the mindsets that people bring to the mobile devices. We'll talk about constraints, capabilities, things of that nature. And as we go along, I'll show you guys some various examples that we can discuss. Now, I don't think this is a particularly brilliant statement. I think this is obvious to most of us at this point, but the growth curve here is pretty stunning. There was one of my favorite tweets said, show me a mobile graph that isn't hockey stick shaped in nature. All right, so, you know, hockey's a game we play a lot where I come from because, you know, it's frozen and cold most of the time, but Android activations outpace baby births. And it isn't even close anymore. I mean, it used to kind of be in the same ballpark, but not now. We sell more iPhones in a given day than there are babies born in the world. And again, it's not even close. Now, eventually, we're all going to have 2, 3, 4, 5 of these devices and we'll be satiated. But I don't know when that's actually going to happen. I mean, we look at Android, you know, and it was well on its way to 1 billion. It's actually at 1 billion at this point. And it took less time than Facebook. And Facebook has this huge valuation because it has 1 billion users. There's this, you know, network effect concept. So this is kind of a big number. iOS is going to hit 1 billion units sometime next year, and I would expect it's going to be earlier than later, frankly. You know, they're going to get their 700 millionth here probably this week or next. I mean, very, very close here. 2011, pretty good year for Apple. They sold more iOS devices than they sold Macs in the previous 28 years combined. I mean, ponder that for a second. That's a lot of units. There are more than 500 million iTunes accounts out there. That's 500 million people that can give you money easily. Right? We are almost at this magic 700 million number. You know, that's any day now. Android finally hit the billion number. And what's amazing is to see that arc and to see how quickly it's kind of started to go in that direction. This wasn't a 20-year project. You know, this got to billion pretty darn fast. Now, to give you some sense of what that actually means, there are about 1 billion active Windows PCs in the world right now. So we have as many Android and iOS devices as we have Windows machines, probably more, frankly, if we're really honest about it. We've got about 2.2 billion internet users. This implies that about half of them can and probably do use some kind of a mobile device to access the internet. And most likely the next billion, the next chunk of people, they're not going to go after a laptop. They're going to go after some rectangle of glass in some way, shape, or form. Now, a lot of folks thought Windows 8 was going to be the savior. Windows 8 was going to come along and completely change the world, and everybody's going to buy PCs again. Well, in 2012, there were more Android devices sold than Windows devices. And so I'm willing to, at this point, basically say Microsoft is irrelevant in this world. They're not irrelevant as a company. They're not going to go away anytime soon. They still make a crap ton of money. They sell an awful lot to enterprises. But in terms of where most of the growth is, I think it's over for them. They don't have a dog in that fight. So you go back to 2008, you can make a pretty compelling argument that Windows market share was north of 95%. At this point, it's closer to 30. Right, so if we're really honest about what devices people are using, and we don't get into these sort of semantic wars about whether a tablet is a PC or not, which I don't think really matters to the folks that are using them. Right, so kind of a big deal. And to give you a sense of this, and this is another Ben Evans piece here, you know, so there's the little PC line, and then look at Apple and Android devices, and look at how quickly they just shoot past PCs. Now, some of that has to do with price. There's no getting around that. I mean, an average PC is still more expensive than a phone or, in many cases, a tablet, right? But the fact is, we've got almost, I mean, it's almost an order of magnitude more here. That's kind of scary. Now, a lot of folks that I've dealt with have tried to say, well, growth is all over and things are going to become normal again. We're going to go back to PCs. That's crap. Every week, more than 500,000 people are dumping their quote-unquote feature phones for a smartphone. Now, one of the things to keep in mind, guys, is not everyone that has a smartphone realizes they have a smartphone. There's a lot of folks that still go to their, their carrier store when their contract is up or when they want a new phone, and they just say, give me whatever, and they walk out and they don't know they have a smartphone in their pocket. They don't know they have a computer in their pocket. I was at my chiropractor's office a few months ago, and one of the PAs was talking to me about phones because, she always sees me with my phone, and so she was showing me a bunch of phones she was going to buy, and every single one of them was running Android 2.2.2.3. And I was kind of surprised by that. I'm like, you do realize these are all old, and they're not going to be able to run apps and stuff. And she's like, yeah, I only want it to, text my daughter and make phone calls. Kind of in the back of my head, I'm going, wow, you can use these things to make phone calls too? I didn't realize that was part of the picture. Who does that, right? But for her, that was a very secondary consideration, the fact that this was a computer. That's going to change. At some point, you look at the raw numbers. I mean, Android clearly has more raw numbers than iOS. They don't seem to have the same level of engagement when you look at, who's using Wi-Fi, who's downloading apps, who's, actually using the device for more than calling and texting. But at some point, this mass of Android folks are going to realize they have a computer. And they're going to start using their smartphones in the same way that you use yours. And ponder what that's going to mean for the kind of experiences you are going to have to deliver in the next 1, 2, 3 years. It took us roughly 16 years to kind of get to this magic first billion number, and billion again is kind of a big deal. But that next billion is going to take 3 years. And you can argue we're already 1 year into that. And so last year around the world, we had about 3.2 billion mobile subscribers. So not quite everybody has one, although I think at one point I saw a stat that there was essentially a mobile contract out there for every human being. Not that everyone actually had one, because some people have 2, 3, 4, depending on their job, depending on what they have to do. The last 4 years, we saw 1 billion people get on board with this. And we still got another 4 billion to go. And believe me, these folks are going to get there. It's just a matter of time. And we are going to hit this point, if we haven't already, where there will be more mobile devices than humans. That doesn't mean they're all active, by the way. I mean, I look at my own household, and I think if I did the math right, we have 6 iPhones for 3 people, something like that, and there's 2 iPads and 4 laptops. I mean, it's just the nature of how technology flows in my world, right? But I think that's not abnormal for a lot of us. Maybe not our parents, but certainly folks in our space, we're buying these things on a pretty regular clip. Now you look at that green line, and for most MBA type folks, that Mac business, very healthy business, be very happy to have that. But then you look at iPad, iPhone, iPod Touch, and you go, wow, those lines are dang near straight up. That's kind of impressive growth. You look at the App Store, you look at Google Play, about 50 billion installs, but that number is like 3-4 months ago. So back in May, Apple announced they passed the 50 billionth number of downloads. Google I/O shortly after that number came out said we just hit 48 billion downloads. So by the end of last May, we were over 100 billion. Right? So you can do the math, you can extrapolate out. Look at where we probably are today, well north of that number. Here's a graph kind of showing how that stuff plays out. The blue is the App Store, red is Google's Play Store. Look at how quickly Google Play caught up. That's pretty amazing to me. Now, we can argue a bit around the edges of what this economy looks like, and I'm somewhat saddened by the fact that this really seems to be beholden to sort of the freemium model, where it's like the game's free or the app is free, but then you got to do in-app purchases to do everything, and there's all sorts of really creepy gamification things that people do to get you to give them even more money. And I don't like that, but that does seem to be the model we're in. And there's an argument to be made that because these things are free, people are willing to take risks. They will try things that they wouldn't try if they had to pay, 10 pounds, 20 pounds, whatever it is to download the game. They probably wouldn't even do it. So maybe we're making more money this way, maybe we're not. I don't know. It's the reality of where we're at. iOS devices typically have a few more apps on them than the typical Android device. Now, we're probably outliers here. My wife was cleaning up her phone the other day, and she said, what are all these apps? I don't even know what half these are. And she counted at one point, I think there's like 80 some odd games on there. I have a 6-year-old, so that's part of the problem. But I don't know what half these apps are. She was asking me a couple of questions about them, and you know, I kind of download them because I hear about them, I try them, and maybe you don't launch them then for forever again. But you know, there's definitely some interest here. Apple has paid out about $10 billion, plus or minus. If you look at the US market at least, Apple is the dominant music retailer. They sell more music than anybody, even Walmart, which is kind of hard to fathom. But it took them considerable amounts of time to hit 10 billion downloads, 20 billion downloads, et cetera. Not so much on apps. You know, in fact, apps are basically a 2-to-1 ratio of purchases. Some of that has to do with cost, I think, because, you know, the average song in the US on iTunes is 99 cents. The average book is, you know, $9.99 or whatever it is. Really hard to get good numbers on that, by the way. And I think the last number I saw on apps was like 23 cents US, which is essentially free. And that's really what it skews towards, is that freemium model. But really what it amounts to is folks are far more willing to download apps than they are songs, which is kind of shocking. A little bit of that, too, I think, has to do with engagement. The fact that a song is going to entertain you for at least a few minutes. A book is going to take you a few days, a few hours, a few weeks. An app might be 5 minutes, and then you never launch it again. Who knows? Horace Dediu, he's another guy that I follow very obsessively in this space. He threw this quote out there. I thought it was very fascinating that, from his standpoint, when you look at the global population, that 1 in 4 of us is going to be using one of these little software capsules. This is what he referred to these devices as. And the interesting thing is, when he made this comment, it was last year. So he was implying that this year, 1 in 4 of us will be walking around with one of these things. And I believe he is accurate on that. Since 2009, mobile web usage in the US has doubled. This is becoming a very, very big deal, and our mobile networks just don't do a great job of handling it, especially in major cities. Facebook, half of their user base is mobile these days. In fact, I think that's the only way my wife interacts with Facebook. I don't think I've ever seen her use anything else. So that's 500 million people, which is kind of scary. Most iOS users have Facebook installed, not as many Android. I'm not quite sure why that is. I don't know if Facebook Home is anything you guys have played with. That didn't seem to take off, at least in the States. Amazon does a ton of sales on mobile devices. They're north of $1 billion these days. And I don't think it's too surprising, especially to us, that smartphone sales have passed computer sales. And they have for quite some time now. Now, I think some of that has to do with just the economics of it. If we take ourselves out of the equation, the laptop that someone buys 2 years ago is not substantially different than the one they would buy today. Yeah, it's faster, it's got more of this, it's got more of that, but for most people, for most usages, they would never notice the difference. So I mean, I think we all vividly remember that era where you'd buy a PC, and then like 6 months later, your friend would buy one, and it was seemingly twice as good as the one you bought, and you're like, oh man! But then, of course, what are you gonna do? You need a machine, you gotta buy it. If we ever just waited for the best machine to come out, you'd never buy anything ever. Right, phones are obviously a little more temporal in nature. You're going to buy those on a more regular basis. That seems to be a annual, every other year kind of thing for most of us. But I also think this is where usage is going. People are getting a lot more value, a lot more use out of their phones and their tablets than they are their PC. So. Now the interesting thing is, what does it mean when most of us are carrying one of these devices around? And when is that going to happen? At this point, at least in the US, we're well over 50%. I think the last numbers I saw, I think they pegged the US at least 60 some odd % of people are carrying a smartphone. And that's fairly consistent across, the Western world as it is. Now, saturation is another interesting question mark here. Right? So saturation is one of those things where it's weird if someone doesn't have that product. A refrigerator, a DVD player, microwave, things like that would be considered saturated, because if you went to someone's house and they didn't have one of those things, it's like, whoa, dude, seriously, are you living in the Stone Age? How do you live without these things? Smartphones are going to hit that faster than anything else. Right now the DVD player is sort of the reigning king of fastest device to get to saturation. Smartphones are going to just blow that out of the water. Tablets are becoming a pretty big deal, especially iPads. Now, there's a really interesting argument. Is it a PC? Is it a post-PC device? Doesn't matter. Is it relevant to the people that are buying these things? The answer is it's not. When is it going to be such that this is a bigger market than that? Well, it probably is right now, as we sit here. Right? In fact, if you go back to 2012, Apple sold more iPads than HP sold PCs. And HP sells a lot of PCs. But seemingly every quarter, numbers come out showing how, oh, there was yet another 10, 12, 15-point decline in PC sales. And they all sort of conveniently forget about the fact that folks are buying iPads and a little bit other devices. Typically, at least in the US, like the second most popular tablet ends up being like the Fire, the Kindle Fire. So I can't remember, do they sell that now in the UK or not? They do now? Okay, I know that was always kind of one of the contention points, that it seems to be a very American-centric device for whatever reason. Anybody know what the most popular camera is on Flickr? Is it a Canon? Is it a Nikon? That's always a fun battle to get into. You get a couple of photography geeks and just sort of throw out, I hear Nikon's better than the Canon you're carrying, and see what happens, sparks fly. It ends up it's the iPhone. In fact, the top 3 are all variants on the iPhone. I find that kind of amazing. I'm not sure when the 5S will creep in, but probably fairly quickly, since they moved 9 million units in the first weekend. Right? This is kind of amazing to me simply because, the Canons, that's pro-level kit right there. This is a site for photography enthusiasts, and the most popular cameras are phones. My wife and I have had a point and shoot for quite a long time, and we were out in Washington, D.C. last year with our son. We were having a little family vacation, and my son really likes to play with the camera, and so she gave him the camera, and he was running around at the Lincoln Memorial taking photos, and all of a sudden I heard that sickening crunch sound, and I went, oh, he dropped it, didn't he? And he did, and it was done, it's toast. And so we kind of had this discussion. It's like, well, do we even bother replacing it? I was very much in the camp of, no, why? We have phones that are actually better as cameras than our old point-and-shoot camera. My wife insisted, no, I really want to have a separate device. So we did buy another point-and-shoot, but really for the vast majority of us, there really is not a good reason to have another device. In fact, before I came on this trip, my wife ran the Twin Cities Marathon. So it's her first and allegedly last marathon. And I brought our point-and-shoot with me, and it stayed in my pocket the entire time. Because every spot I went to wait for, I just took my phone out and just took pictures that way. It was easier, faster, and again, probably better pictures. Anybody want to guess what goes at the end of that sentence? 150 times a what? If you have teenagers, or no teenagers, it's probably an hour, seemingly. Probably never even comes out of their hand. Typically, that's a day. And for some of us, that's probably a little low. Think about how you normally kind of just go about your day. How often do you reach for your phone? Just looking around, many of you are not wearing a watch. Why? Because your phone tells time better than a watch can. Your phone always has the right time. If you change time zones, your phone updates automatically. It's brilliant. I was talking about this with Alan at breakfast this morning. I don't think my son will ever actually wear a watch. Not as a watch. For him, it will be nothing but jewelry. It will be an accent. And the fact that it tells time will be kind of this strange, I don't know why it tells time. I don't know what that's all about. Now, I've given you a lot of fairly US-centric numbers. I apologize for that. But if you look at China, they're seeing huge spikes in their mobile traffic. And this is causing an interesting shift in how they're approaching this. Right? If we look at some UK stuff, 23%, almost a quarter of online sales right now in the UK are coming from a mobile device. That's crazy. And that number is going to go up. There's no getting around that. Right now, and this number blew me out of the water, 20% of global internet traffic is mobile. 20%. And that number is only going to go up. That's stunning to me. Now, hopefully, this is the kind of stuff that gets people's attention. And these are the kind of things that I throw at the folks in my organization when I kind of get this, mobile's not a big deal, mobile's a fad, whatever. It's like, yeah, no, it's not. All right, you don't reach 20% of the frickin' global internet traffic, and probably another 50% of it's Netflix or something like that, streaming video. But if this isn't enough, if you want more, Luke Roboleski puts out stuff pretty much every Monday. He calls it like Data Monday, and so that's another good resource to keep track of. But what this whole thing sort of says to me, and the way I've looked at this in the last couple of years, this personal computer, which many of us have spent our careers working with, isn't all that personal. At least when we compare it to our phones. Just think for a second. Would any of you leave your phone on this table, like, during drink reception tonight? Anybody feel real comfortable with that idea? Or leaving your phone unlocked for a half hour somewhere, just sitting out? Of course not. Your phone goes with you everywhere you go. You ever leave the house, realize you don't have the phone, and go back and get it? I've done that. The other day, I went to pick up my son at school, and I was running a little late and I forgot my phone and I didn't realize it till I'd already kind of pulled out of the house. And I literally almost turned around and went back to get it. And the whole drive, I'm just like, man, I feel so naked without my phone. You know, because I'm thinking, what would happen if my car broke down? What would I do? I wouldn't be able to call anyone. I'd have to go to some stranger's house and ask them to use the phone, and they wouldn't let me in because I'm a creepy looking guy or something. I don't know. But think about what I'd know about you if I had your phone. Think about what I'd have access to. I could take a look at your calendar. I could see where you're supposed to be later today. I could check your email, see who you've been talking to. I could see who you've been texting, what you've been texting, what pictures you've been sending to people. Amazing how that stuff works. We figure out location stuff. That right there is, you know, worth a lot of money to people. Where were you when you did this search? Where were you when you pulled up the map? Where were you trying to go? How can we monetize that? And there are some stunning privacy concerns here. You know, it's really amazing to me how the Snowden leaks about the NSA have played, at least in the US. You know, I don't know how to feel about politicians getting up and saying, it's just metadata. How important could it be? Of course, all the geeks understand that. No, metadata is really friggin' important. Yeah. So we use these things all the time. This has become a pretty constant. You know, we use them at home. Second screen is becoming so popular. Watching, you know, shows and whatnot have hashtags, and seemingly every news program has a frickin' Twitter crawl showing tweets and all that kind of fun stuff. If you're in line somewhere, what do? You pull out your phone because you've got 5 minutes to kill. A lot of us use it at work to get around, you know, nanny state blocking software. You know, but think about when you use your device. I mean, this thing has become almost an appendage for many of us. You know, so that puts us into this weird situation. It's like, all right, well, we need to have an answer to this, you know, but what do we do about that? You know, a lot of vendors are going to come to you and say, no problem, I have a magic shrink ray. We can go ahead and we'll just, you know, take this gun here and we'll shoot it at your thing, and everything will be perfect and your app will just work. And by the way, when a vendor comes to you and says, I have a magic shrink ray, that should be the look on your face. No, you don't. It's a lie. I would love it if there actually was such a thing. I would love it if I could sell something like this to you. That would be great. But that's not enough. If you take nothing out of what I say in this 90-minute slot, guys, it should be this part right here. The most important aspect of delivering a mobile experience is rethinking that experience. What does it mean in a mobile context? I've got some guys in my company that think, well, if we can just get this screen to show up on an iPad, we've won. It's success. We've solved the mobile problem. It's like, dear God, no. That screen was never designed for an iPad. It was never designed for touch. It's not going to cut it. We got to do it better. XKCD had a great way of looking at this, although it's not actually related to mobile. They said you look at the average university website, and it has a whole bunch of crazy stuff on it, and then you look at the reasons why people come to the website, and the only overlap tends to be the name of the school. Same thing applies to your mobile experience. There's a set of things that your experience provides. There's a reason why. There's a set of reasons why people come to your mobile experience. If that's what the intersection looks like, you failed. And people will go somewhere else. And they will do that in a heartbeat. They will delete your app. They will go download another app. They will go to another website. Right? We must get that intersection right. Now, I'm a huge believer in mobile first. I think this is the way we should start thinking about this now. I think the idea of the desktop today is, quite frankly, legacy. You know, we actually now have this stance internally. Any application that we release to the wild, anything that goes external, is automatically got to be mobile. You have to assume that anybody on the outside is coming to you not with a laptop or a 27-inch monitor or something like that. They're coming to you with a mobile phone or a tablet. Right? Now, part of the theory here is that because of all the constraints that mobile devices put on us, it forces us to come up with some really interesting solutions, and those end up making life a lot better by the time we get to the desktop. All right, so we have a lot of size issues to deal with. These things are, you know, pretty tiny, all things considered, even as they get larger. They don't have everlasting batteries, and that's probably the biggest constraint we face, is these things will not last weeks. You know, we're lucky for many of us to get a day, a couple days. Although Nokia released, I think it's called the Asha, and it's designed for developing countries, but this thing will last in standby. I think it's for like 48 days or some crazy thing. I mean, it's like, that's insane that it can last that long. You know, but that was one of their design constraints. Connectivity, we don't always have nice strong Wi-Fi or anything like that. We don't always get good cell signal from our carriers. People's usage pattern is a little different than what we've had in the past. You got to design expecting people are going to use one eye and one thumb. And the real beauty here, and the real reason why I try to get folks to think about mobile first, is we have to focus. We have to get our heads wrapped around the singular most important feature of this mobile experience. So you look at Amazon, and they've clearly taught us that they will sell you anything in some way, shape, or form. And you first look at this, and the thing that leaped out to me is, why is Amazon trying to sell me a dress? Now I understand the recommendation system is really amazing, and it's possible they know things that I don't know about myself, but I'm really not in the market for spring dresses. But yet they're going to try to tell me that, and apparently also a vacuum cleaner and whatnot. A lot of cruft here. And when I compare that to the same site, same day on my phone, all of a sudden all that cruft goes away, and I actually get a recommendation that fits. I mean, those are actually books that I am interested in, right? So the big thing to take away here, guys, is we're losing somewhere in the neighborhood of 3/4 of our real estate. Goes poof, bye, gone. This sort of 10 by 8 resolution that many of us have delivered to now for some time is now cut down almost in 3/4. That's pretty crazy. We lose a lot of space. Now, the benefit here, though, is we start having that conversation with our customers much, much earlier about essentials. What must this application be able to provide? I did this project years ago, and the first day, we're talking to the customer, and he has this ginormous list of requirements. We said, Joe, we can't possibly deliver all that to you within the time and budget you've given us. You need to prioritize. Okay, no problem. I'll prioritize. We'll get together later in the week. So we get together later in the week, and he says, okay, here's my 1s and my 1As. It's like, I don't think you understand that word. Let's try again. Now, the beauty of mobile is there's not enough room for that. So what are the top 3 things this bad boy's got to be able to accomplish? Because if it can't do those 3 things, we're toast. So let's start having that conversation and have it early, as opposed to waiting, and like we typically do on projects, we get towards the end when people are sick and tired. All right, let's cut scope. Right, so you can't have everything. There's just no getting around that. Which of course puts us into the conundrum of, well, shoot, how do we figure out what it is that's actually useful? Well, go ask your users. Do a little game of ethnography. Ask them, watch them, study them in their environment. That's really all ethnography means. What are they trying to do? What do they really want to do? And now, more interestingly today is, where the heck are they when they do it? Where are they when they launch the mapping application and type in a name of a store or something like that? Now for us, again, ironically, this will make it easier to build a desktop experience. You can typically move very easily in that direction. Obviously the desktop, a lot of the constraints go away. We've got more space, we've got more power, we've got connectivity, et cetera, et cetera. But there should be an awfully nice mapping between the most important things for mobile and the most important things on the desktop. It's not always going to be 100%. For example, Delta's mobile app, they're the carrier I fly pretty much exclusively these days because my home is a hub for them, so I don't really have a choice. Their mobile app has, since day one, had the ability to track your bag. Should you choose to check a bag, it will let you take a picture of the little barcode thing they give you and figure out where your bag happens to be. That's an incredibly useful feature on the mobile device. That same feature on the desktop is kind of irrelevant because by the time you get to a computer like that, you're either at a hotel or at your house. There's no, you know where your bag is. Or I should say, the airline has promised you they will deliver your bag to you sometime in the future. Right, so it really isn't relevant to do a bag check at that point. By the same token, for a long time, you couldn't actually buy a ticket on the mobile site. You had to go to the desktop version to buy a ticket. Now, they've since rectified that. Now you can purchase. I'd be very curious to know how many people actually do. Because I know for myself, there's still a little bit of, I'm not sure I really want to buy an airline ticket on a phone because it can be a little hard to figure out, do I have all the dates right? That turns out to be kind of important. Now, I think there's a really interesting argument that we can make mobile experiences better than desktop experiences. There's certain capabilities that our mobile devices have that our desktops don't. And how can we leverage those to actually make that experience be better than what folks get on their desktop? And what does that look like? But again, for me, the real key here is we are forced to focus. Because guys, applications are just like goldfish. They grow to the size of their container. Now, I always thought that was like an urban myth kind of thing. But I grew up on a farm. We had horses and cows. And so we had these big, huge water tanks. And sometimes the tanks would get a little, kind of ugly, and so you throw a couple fish in there to kind of clean things up. And sadly for the fish, this is not a great lifestyle. They typically don't last real long. We're not like pH balancing the water or anything like that. But we had a set of fish at one point that for some reason absolutely thrived, and these things got huge. All right, they were like yay big, and they would like sit at the bottom. They changed color. They weren't gold anymore. They were kind of this browny camouflage looking thing. And if they were at the bottom of the tank and weren't moving, you couldn't see them. Just craziness. All right, so apps do the same thing. Allegedly, this is a search engine. Allegedly. Find the search box. It's like a game of Where's Waldo. We got all this stuff over here. And while some of this is pretty obvious, like, jobs, mail, movies, OMG, what's that all about? Is that, work safe or not? And I don't know what the heck Shine is. I'm not even sure, should I click on that? Is that acceptable? What's going to happen? Then you look at the same exact website on my phone, and all of a sudden, hey, look, there's a search box. Okay, we've dropped a lot of this other superfluous stuff, and we've once again exposed why this site exists. When you have pixels, it's very tempting to use them. For better or worse, on mobile devices, we don't have that luxury. There just aren't enough pixels. You have to leave things space to breathe. Now that forces us, or I would say allows us, to have this conversation with our customers much earlier in the process. What would you say your top 3 tasks are? That's something we really want to get our heads wrapped around. Now this is tough. A lot of our customers are not used to having this conversation early in a project because they want everything. Now, I've talked to some of the folks in my organization, and this really and truly is one of the hardest conversations we have to have with people, is how do we pare this down to the most important features that we're going to expose? The 20%, as opposed to I need everything. Kathy Sierra's got a great way of talking about this. She calls it the featureitis curve. We build an app, it's got a couple things, we add a few more things, we add a few more things, and then we hit what she calls the happy user peak. The app fits people like a glove. It's like their own handmade lightsaber. And what do? We got to justify budgets, we got to justify staffing levels, we got to feed the pet want of some VP somewhere, and next thing you know, we add more, we add more, and we add more, and then we get Microsoft Word. And we end up with an app that sucks for people. Ironically enough, having too many features is worse than having too few. I'm absolutely convinced if Delta's mobile app, if all it could do is allow me to check in for my flights and check flight status, that's a win. I'm good with that. All the other stuff they have in there could disappear tomorrow and it would not hamper me in one way, shape, or form. So we want to have this conversation early on in the process. What's the most important thing? What does this mobile device, this mobile experience have to deliver? And again, that is going to translate very nicely to the desktop. It's a lot like accessibility. Very handy that way. We end up, ideally, with a better experience for everybody. Jason Grigsby threw this out on Twitter last year, and I thought it was very fitting. We'll know this mobile web thing is ready once this link to the desktop disappears. And I think about the kids. And I think about the world they're growing up in. And for a lot of them, this desktop thing is going to be something they don't even know what it is. Daddy, what's a link to the desktop mean? Think about the save icon. What is the prototypical save icon throughout all software? It's a 3.5-inch floppy disk. Do any of you have a machine at home right now powered on that actually has a 3.5-inch floppy drive anymore? I mean, think about our kids. They don't know what the heck that is. That's quaint. Actually, better question, do you actually have anything that would fit on a 3.5-inch floppy drive anymore? Remember when that was a lot of space? And now it's like it's a joke. In fact, I did this conference a couple years ago, Java Zone, and their badges for the week were 3.5-inch floppy drives. It was awesome. It was the coolest badge I ever saw. Now, most people actually write protected their disks so that they wouldn't get infected while they were at the conference. I don't know if it helped with the conference flu or not, but perhaps it did. Now, I'm a big believer in what Luke has been talking about here for some time about this designing for mobile first, and he put together a series on O'Reilly about this, and he was kind enough actually to give me that little code down there, auth-D. Now, I don't know if it still works. I haven't tried it in a while, but in theory, that'll knock 50% off anything on O'Reilly's site. At least it did. Again, I don't know if that works anymore. It might not, but they may have finally decided to get rid of that. I don't know. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about mobile mindsets. What we need to understand when people come to our mobile device, when they come to our mobile experience, they're hiring it to do something. What is that? Are they trying to be entertained? Are they trying to get some information? Are they trying to find some place? What is it that they're trying to do when they come there? So that's really what we need to get our heads wrapped around. Now, Josh Clark wrote a great book called Tapworthy. And the UI stuff has gotten a little dated now, especially with iOS 7. Don't fixate on the fact that it says iPhone apps. A lot of what's in here is applicable to mobile in general. But he identified 3 mindsets that bring people to mobile devices. There's microtasking. I need to get in and get out. I need an answer to this question. Is it going to rain on my way into work today? Do I need to bring an umbrella? I'm bored. Entertain me. I'm waiting for the bus, or I'm waiting for the train, or I've got 20 minutes before my next client. Whatever it is, give me some way to entertain myself. And to me, the huge part of mobile devices these days is find me something nearby. I conceptually knew how much I use these devices, but it really becomes clear to me when I'm outside the US, because I get that wonderful text message when I land that tells me how expensive it's going to be should I dare use my phone the way I'm used to using my phone. And as you're wandering around a city with which you are not utterly familiar, you're like, boy, I'd really like to be able to get a map right now. It's so helpful. Now, if you dig through Google's user interface guidelines, they have very similar concepts. They call it repetitive now, bored now, and urgent now. Same basic ideas. Luke Roboleski takes this a little bit further, kind of beefs it up a bit. He talks about look up and find, so do searches, things like that. Explore, play. He brings the social part in, check-in and status. This is a really interesting aspect of a lot of these apps. In fact, Delta's mobile site now, or mobile app, when you land, the first thing it does is ask you if you want to post this to Facebook. Now, my first reaction is, why would I need to tell people that I'm not at home right now? Please go to my house and steal my stuff. Thank you for that wonderful feature. But a lot of people do it. And of course, edit and create. Now, a lot of folks, when we first started with these mobile devices, the very first thing people said is, everybody wants a physical keyboard, and if without physical keyboards, nobody's going to use these things. That turns out not to be true. And while I will posit that you probably aren't going to write, the next great novel with your thumbs on a phone, you might, everybody in this room has done some edit and create type features. And I know for myself, I reach for my iPad much more frequently now than I reach for my laptop. The use cases for my laptop are getting smaller and smaller and smaller almost by the day, and I'm really surprised by that. I really thought for me the iPad would fit a different niche, and it turns out it can do a lot more than I give it credit for. So what we need to understand when we're building a mobile experience, why does someone launch it? What's the context they're launching it in? What mindset are people bringing to that? All right, so let's look at a couple apps from my phone here. This is Tweetbot. This is what I use to access Twitter, at least until Twitter, outlaws everything. For me, this is a boredom thing. Maybe this is, I got 20 minutes, let's see what's going on in the world. It's also kind of a microtasking thing. Let's see what kind of news is happening, see if there's anything new with the US government shutdown, all that kind of crazy crap. A lot of you guys will recognize this one. All right, this is the tube map. I use this when I'm here, to figure out how to get from point A to point B. Right, very important when you're not as familiar with how the system works. So this is local for sure. I'm here. How do I get somewhere else? And can I figure that out? But it's also a microtasking thing. Let's on Thursday, I'm going to try to meet some of my office guys that are over here, and we're going to meet somewhere kind of over by Tower Bridge. Okay, well, I roughly know how to get there, but that's going to be a microtasking thing for me. Tell me how to get from here to there as painlessly as humanly possible. This is Instapaper. Instapaper is a site that allows you to save articles from the web to their web service and then download them to your device for offline reading. It also typically makes them easier to read. So for me, this is very much a microtasking thing. I tend to queue up a bunch of articles on specific topics for research or talk ideas, things like that. It's also a boredom thing. And because it works offline, once I've synced up the articles, I don't have to have an internet connection anymore. So that's very handy when I'm on an airplane or I don't have a cell connection. This is one of an almost infinite number of weather apps I seem to have collected. Weather apps for me tend to be very repetitive. You know, is it going to rain today? Is it going to snow today? Do I need a jacket? Do I, you know, can I send my kid to school in shorts? Things like that become very important. Now, part of the reason I like showing you this one is because they use spark lines. Right? That's an Edward Tufte concept. It's a word-sized graph. Very, very cool stuff. Of course, local is another big part of this. You know, do I really care what the weather's like 5,000 miles away? Not so much, unless I'm going there. Then I care. But the stuff I really care about is, okay, right here, right now, can I go for a walk without bringing a jacket? You know, is it going to rain while I'm doing a little you know, sightseeing tour? This is Trism. This is one of almost uncountable number of games, although my wife did apparently arrive at a number. This is definitely a boredom thing. Almost any game is going to fit into that capability, although for me, this also was microtasking for a little bit. My wife and I used to compete to see who could get the highest score, and then she just completely blew me out of the water, so I stopped playing because, you know, I was never going to beat her. This is Hipmunk. This is a travel search site. What I love about Hipmunk is it doesn't just rank flights by cost or something like that. It also uses agony as one of the criteria. So, you know, how long is the flight? How short are the layovers? How long are the layovers? Things of that nature. You know, this is very much a microtasking thing for me. You know, if I've got to get from point A to point B, what are my options? What am I looking at for prices? Things of that nature. You know, if a flight gets canceled, is there any chance I can get home sooner or faster? What's it going to cost me, et cetera, et cetera. Another game, same deal, boredom, maybe microtasking. Some games are sort of forcing people to be more microtasky these days. Yelp, this is you know, find places to eat nearby. You know, notice nearby is so, you know, very prominent in their UI. You know, and this is something I use quite a bit, you know, to find places to eat. You know, if I'm traveling in a city I don't know very well, it's like, all right, well, what do they have that's close and reasonably priced or not, depending on our mood. ESPN, pretty much any news app fits into the category of I'm bored. Although it could be microtasking, you know, if you want to keep up on the scores of your favorite team, something like that, you know, see what's going on. This is a great way of doing that. Movie phone. Now, what I love about this is notice that button and notice where it is. I mean, if you put your phone in your hand and you just let your thumb fall on the screen, what does it hit? And do you think that's a coincidence that that's where their button is? Hint, it's not. You know, so this is very much a local thing. Find me a theater nearby and tell me what's playing in the next couple hours. Let's go see a movie. Let's see what's going on. Could be microtasking. You know, if you're trying to maybe make plans for later in the week or something like that, you want to get a sense of what's going on, this can certainly help you with that. This is an old shot of the iOS Stocks app. This has been revamped in iOS 7. You know, but for a lot of folks, again, this sort of newsy type thing tends to be a microtasking, repetitive sort of thing. You know, some folks might have this launching almost constantly. Good old ConvertBot. So I use this when I travel to convert from one measure to another. You know, I can kind of think in pounds and euros. I cannot think in kroners at all. Although I've learned in traveling, if you happen to be in the Scandinavian countries and it is kroners, just don't even bother doing the conversion because it's just going to be really expensive. You know, pretty much the same thing when I'm in London, by the way. It's just, don't even bother, it's expensive. So what we're trying to figure out, guys, ultimately, is who is using our mobile app, why are they using it, where are they when they use it. All right, so let's pick on Amazon. I think it's fair to say in most geek circles, at least, everybody's played with Amazon in some way, shape, or form. And I would argue their website is pretty decent, not amazing. You know, I wouldn't put it in the category of, you know, greatest design of all time. It's very utilitarian, but it does get the job done. And what they've basically taught me, at least, is they will give you almost any product on earth to your door in 2 days or less. You know, they've made that pretty abundantly clear. You know, they've got a very good auto-suggest widget based on your, you know, past, you know, purchasing things. They're very good at figuring that out pretty quickly. You know, they've got a very nice list page that gives you a lot of detail about products. You know, we've got cover, we've got price, title, you know, dates, how many reviews, whether it's eligible for Prime, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you can get a lot of data right there. Is this the product I'm thinking about? And then you get to their actual product page, and again, just a wash in information. We got a lot of stuff going on here. You know, we've got the different bindings for this. You know, I'm not sure why the perfect paperback is a little less than the mass market paperback, but you know, maybe you want the audio version, or for some reason you want the hardcover. Of course, you've got the ubiquitous, why don't you just read it on your Kindle right now? You don't even need to wait. We'll have it beamed to you as if by magic. Away you go. And then, of course, finally, please exchange currency for goods. And away we go. Now, that's great. This works. My wife will tell you I have spent plenty of money on Amazon.com. She has the receipts to prove it. You can't simply take that and sort of squeeze it down and expect that it's going to just work. There is no amount of CSS magic pixie dust you can sprinkle on that site to make it just work on a mobile phone or a tablet. Right? It's just not going to translate. So the challenge then becomes, all right, what would we change about it? What would we do away with? We don't have enough real estate, so some things are going to have to go over the side. What are those going to be? We need to think long and hard about what kind of mindsets are people going to bring to Amazon's mobile site as opposed to what they bring to their physical site, their legacy desktop site. So let's take a peek, see what they did. This is the mobile website on my phone from a bit ago. It's been changed a little bit. They've kind of gotten rid of the rounded corners and gone to a little more of a gray look, at least in the last time I was playing with it. But you'll notice right away, we've again lost a huge chunk of our real estate. And they have stripped away an awful lot of stuff to give me, I would argue, more relevant recommendations than what I'm seeing here on the main page of their desktop site. Now, odds are you're going to see something different than me. Right? So it'll tailor that in some way, shape, or form. You may not even see books. For you, it might be music or videos or something like that. It all depends on who you are and what your purchase history is. But they've clearly cut an awful lot of cruft away from the system. Now, interestingly enough, this little Get Amazon Apps thing now is an advertisement, and it tends to rotate. And in what I can only say is a very deliberate and evil choice, the search Amazon.com box starts in the same spot as where the advertisement is, and then a little bit of JavaScript runs and moves it up. I cannot tell you how many times I have tapped the advertisement intending to tap in the search box. I guarantee you that is not a coincidence. All right, so if we look at an actual product page, they obviously have data that says the cover shot is important. Because I can't even buy here. I need to scroll with my little thumb before I can hit the buy button. Clearly the cover shot matters, so they wouldn't give so much real estate to it. We finally get to the next screen. I can add it to my shopping cart. I can add it to the wish list. I keep scrolling with my thumb. Here's all the reviews. We have the ubiquitous add both of these items to the cart for the same price as if you bought them separate, but please don't do the math and pretend it's a special deal. Love how they do that. We have another search box. We don't want to make you go all the way to the top because you've already, scrolled with your thumb like twice. God forbid you got to flick a couple more times. Our thumbs can't handle that. Although honestly, part of the reason they do that is they don't want you to go to the top. Because if you go back to the top, you've got a URL bar, and it's very tempting to type in somebody else's URL. Right, so they would much rather you just search right here. Thank you for asking. Product page has mostly the same data that you're going to get on the main page. It's crammed, obviously. Although these little guys are fully clickable, or I should say tappable, sorry. It's a hard habit to break. Tap with your thumb on the description or the little plus sign, and it will go ahead and blow that out for you. But now here's the same product page on their website. Notice a little more cluttered, honestly. And so when we compare and contrast, I argue that the mobile site's cleaner, all things considered. Now, I think they've done a pretty effective job, all things considered, and the amazing thing about Amazon in particular, they've got a lot of resources, and so they've thrown everything at this problem. They have mobile apps for all the platforms. They have mobile websites that work on all the platforms. They have iPad apps, iPad optimized websites. I mean, they have every possible combination of things you can imagine they have thrown at this problem. Most of us don't have that luxury to just say, yes, we'll do all of it. We have to pick and choose. Okay. It helps to have their bankroll for sure. Now there are some constraints when it comes to designing for mobile, and this becomes a pretty big deal. You don't have a lot of space. Pixels are incredibly precious in this space. Now again, I see this as a win because it forces us very early on in the process to start asking, what do we have to have? What are the 3 most important things this app has to do? So it's on us from very early on to eliminate as many things as possible. And by the way, once you think you've eliminated everything, cut a few more things and you're probably getting there. Now, everybody's got different coverage maps. I know in the US, Verizon loves to show this every opportunity they get. You know what? Every carrier sucks. I've yet to meet a carrier that actually has ubiquitous access everywhere you go and everything is high speed and there's no dead spots. Everybody's got them. Doesn't matter what country you're in, there is no such thing as perfect cell coverage. Inevitably, you're going to go from having a bunch of bars to no bars to back to a bunch of bars. I know for me on my commute home, there are like 2 random spots where I must be in between cell towers because I drop and then literally 5 seconds later, boom, I'm back to 5 bars. So to me, this is one of the big problems we have now. I had a student in my class at the University of Minnesota last year who assured me that with some of the coming technology and some of the embedded stuff that he works on, this problem will somehow magically be solved. I don't know if I believe him necessarily, but it'd be interesting to see what that looks like in a few years' time. The moral of the story, we've spent a lot of our careers building for nice big Cat5 cables or Wi-Fi connections, and we can't do that anymore. We don't have that luxury. Right? So we have to change how we build these things. We need to leverage sprites. We need to minify our JavaScript. We need to take advantage of HTML5. Maybe we don't need a whole bunch of images. Maybe Canvas can do more for us in less space. Maybe we think twice about using massive JavaScript libraries. Maybe we take advantage of lazy load and application cache and things like that. Now, one of the real benefits of this approach is all that stuff that makes life better for our mobile users makes life better for our desktop users. This is a win-win. That's awesome. Because here's the thing, man, performance today is a big deal. People expect websites to perform in almost ridiculous speeds. Now, as a front-end guy, I always sort of felt there was essentially a limit to how fast we really needed to make something. That eventually it's like the difference between like 300 milliseconds and 500 milliseconds. There's no way anybody can actually tell the difference, so don't bother. I'm wrong. If Amazon adds 100 millisecond delay to their pages, 100 milliseconds, sales drop by a full point. That is stunning to me. Now, I guarantee you nobody can actually like, oh yes, this is taking a whopping 100 milliseconds, that's it, I'm leaving. But it's enough of an irritant that subconsciously people just, okay, I'm not going to do it. If you add a 500 millisecond delay to Google, now I would admit this is kind of getting into that realm of perception. Although, I mean, let's be honest, 500 milliseconds, really? Is the world going to like stop spinning if you don't get the answer to this question in 500 milliseconds? Apparently, because when they introduce a whopping 500 millisecond delay, their search traffic drops by 20%. And it's a sticky percent. So people who feel this poor experience, they don't come back for a while. So you guys remember back in the day, which by the way, my 6-year-old said that to me a couple weeks ago. He said, Dad, back in the day. And I was kind of like, whoa, wait a minute, you're 6. I don't think you get to use that phrase yet. You got to wait till like, what, 10, 12? Then you can start talking about back in the day. Back in the day, Google actually made you hit enter before you saw search results. You guys remember that? You had to type something in, hit enter, and then it would take you to a search results page. It would be very fast, but you still had to enter. And then they gave us Google Suggest, and you would start typing and the top 10 results would show up. And of course, even that's not fast enough for us. Now you start typing and you instantaneously go to a search results page that changes in front of your very eyes as you continue to type. You do realize what the next evolution of that is, correct? You will open Google and there will already be search results there. We know this is what you wanted to see. Don't ask how we know those things. It'll just creep you out. You need to expect that your mobile users are distracted. As much as we may wish that our labor of love, that is these amazing mobile experiences, would be their sole focus, it's not. Now, I doubt that the desktop apps that we have slaved over for many years were really ever their focus either. In most cases, they're simply a tool to get their job done, and in many cases, a nuisance. Right? So even if we are lucky enough that they do get to focus on our app, you have to consider the environment they're in while they're using the application. Now, hopefully, they're not driving while doing this, although it is kind of scary to see what people will do while hurtling down the street at various rates of speed. Like my wife and I were driving into work last week and saw a woman applying makeup while driving, and it's like, that just always freaks me out. It's like, how can you even possibly pretend you're focusing on the road when you're, anyway. Mobile usage tends to be a little choppier, although I would argue this is starting to change. There's kind of long been this belief that people sort of get in and get out of mobile apps. I think that's starting to change as we use these for more productive things than simply, tweeting what we're eating for lunch or something. You're starting to see folks engage more deeply. In fact, we've rolled out a bunch of iPhones to claims reps. And so when they're out in the field now checking on an insurance claim, they're using their phone, where in the past they would have used 8, 10, 12 different devices. Now, our claims adjusters love it because they don't have to carry all this stuff around. They can do a lot more with one device. Some of our insureds, though, are a little skeptical of this. In fact, we had somebody call into the claims center and say, I don't know what your claim rep's been doing, but he's been in my backyard for 45 minutes playing on his phone. It's like, right, he's doing his job, on his phone, but to the person it looked like he was playing Angry Birds or something, because they didn't compute that, no, this can really be a business device. You have to expect one-handed use, and as should be pretty obvious when you look at these big mandibles, they're not mouse pointers. They're nowhere near as precise as we get with mouse pointers. So your app has to work with one thumb, which of course leads to a very interesting question. Well, is it the left thumb or the right thumb? Which thumb do we need to aim for? Because parts of the screen are easy to get at depending on which thumb we're talking about. So roughly a third of the screen is very easy to access with your thumb, and this is what is typically called kind of the activity zone. So we look at ConvertBot again. This space over here would be considered the activity zone for someone holding their phone in their right hand. Okay, because it's very easy to sweep across. And there is, I honestly think, a limit to how big these phones can be and still be useful with one hand. In fact, I can't remember which Galaxy it is. It's, I don't know if it's the Mega or the Note 3 or something like that. Actually has a mode you can run in where it shrinks the display down so that you can use it with one hand. I thought, man, that's kind of crazy that it has a mode to shrink the UI down to a smaller size phone, essentially. Very bizarre. Now, I do not think it is a coincidence that so much of their interface is squarely in the activity zone that's easy to get to with your thumb. Now, another thing to consider with these things is where toolbars end up. So if you look at a handful of apps that I showed you guys before, we look at TweetBot, we look at the TubeMap app, we look at MoviePhone again, look at where all those toolbars are. And contrast that with most of the apps you've built in your lifetime. Most of the apps we've worked on traditionally, we put the toolbar at the top. Now, part of the reason we do that, guys, is because it's easier to get there with your thumb. But here's the other thing. If I put my hand over the screen here to touch something at the top, what have I done to the screen with my hand? I've covered up the content. So that's a huge part of the reason why you don't want people messing around with stuff up here, because now they can't see anymore. That's kind of a big deal. You have to expect that people are moving when they're going to use your mobile experience. They're not going to stand here and look. So Clark calls this kind of the blurry vision, that you need to basically do this, and if you can still figure out what to tap with your thumb, you've done it right. If you can't do that, you need to think twice. These gestures that a lot of us know because we're kind of geeky, a lot of folks don't. Now, I would argue that some of these have permeated popular culture. The idea of kind of pinching and whatnot to zoom in and zoom out, I think that's pretty safe. In fact, a friend of mine was telling me they were getting ready to go on a road trip, and they had like a paper map out on the table, and their young child came up and tried to pinch on the map and said, "Daddy, why is the map broken? And where's the little blue dot telling us where we are?" Because that's how maps work. That's how kids think. This is how their world is. Right, so for the vast majority of people, these gestures are completely ignored. This is one of the big problems I ran into with Windows 8, is some of those gestures were really, really bizarre and not the kind of thing that you would naturally try to do. Yeah, geeks will figure it out, but your parents probably won't. Right, so they're not nearly as discoverable as we may have liked them to be. Now, this poses a problem because we have this natural tension. We got all this stuff we want to show. We got this little itty bitty window to show it in. That means we got to hide some stuff. How do we balance that? The first step is making sure you don't hide anything that's crucial, so that the stuff that is sort of off the main thread is really sort of a secondary or tertiary sort of experience, that the main stuff they can get to very quickly and easily. If they got to dig for the other stuff, that's probably okay. But if we look at TweetBot, how would I email a tweet? I assure you it can be done. Anybody drawn towards the little mail icon? Although again, that doesn't always translate well depending on the locale. In some locales, I look at that and I have no idea what you mean by an envelope. Right? That's actually direct message. So emailing a tweet actually means you have to do a long hold, a press and hold. So if you press and hold on a tweet, you get a contextual pop-up menu, of which you can clearly see there's the email option. Now, I'm not arguing this is a bad design. I mean, let's be honest, emailing a tweet is not a primary thing. This is not something you're going to do every single tweet you encounter. But it is an extra step, and it's something that I didn't know was there for a while. It took me some experimenting. Will an average user experiment with your application? Probably not. Now again, we probably would have tried that. Our parents would have just given up and probably wouldn't have figured out you could email a tweet at all. Now the other thing that's interesting, a lot of apps will have these little icons on the bottom that allow you to actually change what is done with those buttons. So you can actually configure the app to be more natural to your usage pattern if you wish. Now I don't know how many people actually know they can do this in apps. This may not be obvious to a lot of folks. I mean, we don't typically reconfigure our desktop applications, so this is another one of those things we run into where people are like, well, I didn't know we could even do that. That's not the only thing they hide. If you go to just a regular old tweet and you just tap on it, not the long hold, just the tap, you get a little contextual menu that allows you to do what I would argue is the most common inline features: reply to a tweet, retweet, favorite a tweet, etc. Now, to make matters somewhat worse, press and hold performs different functions depending on what you press and hold on. So if I press and hold on a URL, I get a URL specific context menu. If I press and hold on someone's Twitter handle, I get a Twitter handle related menu. Now, I'm not arguing what they did was bad necessarily, but you have to keep in mind there is this tension between all the stuff you want to show, the limited amount of real estate you have to show it in. How do you balance those two things out? And again, to me, the key thing is that initial question is, what are the top 3 tasks? If we don't have good answers to that, the rest of it all kind of falls apart really quickly. Now, I've spent a lot of time telling you about the things we can't do, and I think it's just as important to ponder all the stuff that we can do. There are things our mobile devices can do that PCs can't, and I think that is contributing to the decline in PC prices, or the fact that PCs aren't selling as much as they used to. Orientation is a big part of this. Vast majority of apps are going to change based on orientation. Almost every human interface guideline you're going to read is going to recommend that. These devices have more sensors and gyroscopes and accelerometers in them. That's crazy. I saw this example from the civil war in Syria, where rebel fighters were using an iPad to adjust a mortar. And so they were using that to get the angle on the mortar right. And I thought, holy crap, that was an unintended use case for sure. I have this app for my phone and this cradle that allows me to attach it to a putter, and I can hit putts, and the app will tell me the face angle of my putter, the arc of my stroke, and the tempo of my stroke. And it isn't so important what all those things are as whether I'm consistent. And so then it tells me whether I'm consistent across 5 putts. It allows me to compete with my buddies. It compares me to a pro. You know, it's Ping's app, so it'll compare me to the Ping pros. And of course, it will helpfully recommend a Ping putter that will solve all of my putting woes. But that's kind of crazy. I know there are some apps on the phones that will track your sleep patterns. So you turn the app on, you put your phone under your pillow, and then it tracks like how much you basically toss and turn during the night and gives you some data about that you can look at the next morning. Location. I think it's hugely important, a little creepy, but hugely important. And while yesterday we talked in the HTML5 workshop about how you can use location on your PC too, your phone is almost always more accurate because your phone today has a little GPS chip in it, as opposed to most laptops which don't. Touch is becoming, bar none, the dominant paradigm. These multi-touch gestures are leaking into every part of our world. And you look at just the pure numbers here. You know, Apple, their last holiday quarter, sold 48 million phones, almost 23 million iPads. The Android activations are just through the frickin' roof. You know, even Windows Phone 7, 8, the Surface 2, these are all touch-based devices. Nokia and BlackBerry attempted to shift in this direction, although frankly it's too late for both of them. You know, I don't know what to make out of Nokia. This chart's kind of scary if you were a BlackBerry shareholder. You know, you can see here, by the way, that this comes from when the iPhone was introduced to today. And notice they kept going up for a while there. It wasn't until, for whatever magic reason, in 2010 where they really started to plummet, and things are very dire at this point. But I think about my kid quite a bit, I think as natural as a dad. And I look at the world he's growing up in, and I realize that touch is not just about a phone anymore. My home airport, if you wander around it, you will see these kiosks everywhere. And from a distance, they look like just any standard, tell me what's nearby kind of thing. But then you get closer and you realize, oh no, this thing wants me to touch it. This thing wants me to actually put in something like, find me a coffee shop or find me, a place to get water, whatever it is. And if that isn't enough, on the little rotating ad thing above it, every fourth ad or something says, hey, by the way, don't just stand there. Go ahead and touch me. Come on, touch me. It's okay. You wander down, this used to be in the C concourse, it's somewhere else now, I haven't found it yet. They have this game, it's huge, it's wall size, right? Each one of these is a massive TV. It is a touch-based memory game that you can play on your way to your gate. At Hartsfield in Atlanta, they have this. This is an American football game where you can take and throw the football all by using your fingers, by touching the display and having it go ahead and throw the football around. I was at a conference last year in Sweden, and they had this wall, there's this panel hanging on the wall, and you can't see it because my projector's a little burned out here. Above it, there was a sign saying, touch me. And my first thought was, I bet that sign wasn't there when they first hung that on the wall. And I bet in a year that sign's gone. I think we were rapidly approaching an era where if there's a rectangle of glass on the wall, of course you can touch it. What else would it be? Most hotels these days are going to have some kind of touch-based kiosk that you can interact with. So don't bother talking to the concierge or the front desk. Just go ahead and touch this screen and it will tell you where to go to eat or what the weather's going to be. This is very common at Marriott's. This one actually has an iPad that you can use instead of a full-fledged computer screen, which is interesting. I was at a hotel in Portland earlier this year, and sure enough, they have this giant screen waiting for you right as you walk in the door. If you want to figure out what your flight times are, something like that, it's right there. This was at another Marriott in, I think it was Seattle, again, all touch-based, touch me, touch me. It's at a conference center in San Jose. This is touch-enabled. Come on, folks. At some point, these things are going to disappear. They're not going to have to tell people to touch them anymore. That's going to be a thing of the past. I was at a restaurant near one of our conferences last year, and on every table was this little interactive thing. You could order, you could buy food, you could play games. You wouldn't even have to interact with your waiter if you didn't want to. If the people you were with were really boring, you could just play games the whole time. This was the way things were done in that restaurant. I thought that was kind of fascinating. I was at a hotel last year in Florida, and I asked for the wine menu, the wine list, and they gave me an iPad. And my first thought was, this is brilliant because of two things. First of all, it's backlit, so even though the restaurant's very dark, I can actually read it, and I can search. Love it. Same venue outside all our conference rooms with these little TVs, and my first thought was, well, that must just be a display, much like on the outside of these conference rooms, you got a little piece of paper that tells you what's going on inside. But then I said, hey, wait, I can actually touch this thing. And sure enough, there's a little mouse pointer right under my finger. It's translating my tap into a click, unfortunately. I was at a car wash near my home earlier this year, and sure enough, they had an iPad hanging on the wall that was telling me to tap it to Belly. I don't know what Belly is, to be honest with you, but I've seen them more and more, little iPads hanging around at various restaurants saying, come on, interact with me, do something with me. Again, my home airport, the G concourse, actually where I flew out of to come here this week, all along it now are iPads as far as the eye can see. Every single freaking station has an iPad. You notice there's also places to charge your various doodads. Even at the tables now, they've put iPads. So if the person you're traveling with is a complete bore, no problem. You don't even need to interact with them at all. You can just play with an iPad while you're waiting for dinner. We were out in Virginia last year with my family. We did a little vacation, and we were at the Air and Space Museum. And I noticed my son was interacting with this little stand thing. I didn't think much of it. And then I got closer and went, holy crap, this is all touch-based. And my then 5-year-old didn't even think twice about playing with this. I know a couple years ago we had some bad weather roll through town, and my son had some questions, and so I grabbed the iPad, I went to YouTube, typed in tornadoes, we were looking at tornado videos, and he's just tapping away on the screen like it's nothing. A couple days later, he came back down and said, hey, Dad, can I see those videos again? I said, sure. The iPad was upstairs, so I grabbed my laptop, go to YouTube, type in tornadoes, same videos. What does he try to do? Tries to touch the screen. And what does Daddy do? No, don't touch the screen. You can tell this is very confusing, because this is how you interact with a computer. Of course, I tried to use this as a legitimate argument as to why we needed both an upstairs and a downstairs iPad. I mean, that would have solved a whole host of problems there. My CFO didn't have any belief in that. She said that wasn't a good idea. So I think we're hitting a point, gang, where this touch-based thing is just assumed. That if you can interact with something, it's going to be with your fingers. And maybe voice at some point. We'll see. All these devices have audio. You can talk to them. They can talk to you, which is both a blessing and a curse. They have cameras, take pictures, do this all the time. How many of you take pictures for notes sometimes? You know, you see a URL or something like that, where you take a picture of it. You know, I've done that quite a bit. They have all sorts of interesting connectivity issues now. They can connect to your car. They can connect to your house. They have proximity sensors. They have your email. They have contacts. They have all these interesting apps. Now, I do want to point out that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. I don't know if you guys remember last year when Path got in a bunch of trouble because they were sending your whole contact book up to their servers, but you should feel okay because they were using SSL to do it. Don't worry that we have all your contacts. Of course, I think one of the coolest things is augmented reality. So the fact that I can say, hey, by the way, what tube station's nearby? And it can actually tell me, and it can tell me what lines run there. And it can tell me what other tube stations are nearby in case maybe I want to walk an extra block and maybe it's got better service. We can ask our phones, what star is that? What constellation is that? What satellite just buzzed over my head? You know, I didn't realize how useful this kind of stuff was till, I think it was last fall. My son had some buddies over, and we were packing them up in the car to go home. It was, you know, late at night. All the stars were up in the sky. And of course, one of the kids says, hey, Daddy, what star is that? Now think about what our parents would have said. They'd have made something up, wouldn't they? They'd be like, that's Nebulon 6. Yeah, Nebulon, whatever. Nowadays, what do? We take out our phone, point it at the sky, and say, well, that's apparently that's Vega. Yeah, that's Vega, buddy, whatever that is, right? You guys seen this commercial? I think it's a Google commercial. A dad is like putting his kid to bed, and his kid's asking all these questions about Mars. You know, like, Daddy, how far away is Mars? And Daddy rattles off the answer. You know, why is Mars red? Rattles off the answer. And then the camera pans back, and you can see he's got his phone in his hand. And his phone is using voice to pick up the kid's question and beep, beep, do the search and give you the answer. It's kind of cheating, I guess, but, you know. Now, can you do that with your laptop? I mean, you can get to a lot of this information from your laptop. There's no getting around, but what's easier? Trying to lift up your laptop and doing this, or just take your phone out of your pocket and do that? Now, interestingly enough, and I'll talk more about this tomorrow, some of these capabilities, though, aren't exposed in the browser. So this is one of those interesting dividing lines. Do we build a native app? Do we build a browser app? We can do an awful lot in the browser, and that space is very rich indeed, but there are still certain features that are only going to be exposed on the native side of the coin. Let's take a look at TED quickly. I don't know how many of you guys have seen any of their stuff, but some of the most inspiring and just phenomenal talks I've ever seen are on TED, and it's just really, really amazing. You know, they've got a decent website. It's a little JavaScript heavy for my taste. You know, as you start kind of futzing with the things on the right, this thing animates and changes in front of you, and, you know, give you a lot of different ways to sort of find content. You know, that's really the big challenge with TED at this point. They got so many great videos. It's like, how do you find them? You know, and as you futz with them, it goes ahead and reorders this. And by the way, that is probably my all-time favorite talk right there, Sir Ken Robinson. Absolutely amazing talk. Yeah. But there's a lot of really good ones. There's no getting around that. And, you know, again, my big argument is as you start clicking on these things, it goes ahead and, you know, there's this delay while it goes ahead and clicks on things. And, but it is an interesting way of being able to find stuff. Now, if you think about how most people would use TED in particular on a mobile device, you'd have to make some changes. Now, maybe there's some capabilities we could leverage. You know, we'll see kind of how they approach it. Now, they've modified this over the years. This is their original iPhone app, and it's pretty ugly because everything begins with TED. It's like, yeah, I know it's TED. I installed the TED app. I don't think you need to tell me about TED every single time. You know, so that makes it a lot harder to search that, scan that with your eyes. Your eyes have to move over 4 bits before they get to something more relevant, right? But it certainly is simpler than what they have on the website. And they've cut away an awful lot of cruft. I would argue the iPad's the most natural device for this, though. You know, the iPad sort of begs you to sit back in a nice, comfortable chair and engage for half an hour, whatever it is. Now here I think they've done a better job. We've got nice, big touch targets. We can see the nice videos. We got the faces. That's usually what people resonate with. But they've got a bunch of different ways to actually sort through this content. You know, different themes, different sort of tags people have applied to it. And then once you find one that you think is kind of interesting, now you get a nice, big touch target. Ironic that they say click to play. There's no clicking on a touch device. Maybe I'm being pedantic. Right, but you get some decent data here. Now maybe this could be a little easier to read, maybe that could be a little bigger, but again, they give you, I think, a pretty nice way of looking at it. I think it's definitely much, much cleaner than what they have certainly with the phone. Now when we think about design here, one of the biggest things, and I feel like I'm kind of beating the proverbial dead horse here, but you don't have a lot of space. Every pixel is precious. Now it's very tempting to sort of jam in a whole bunch of stuff. Don't do that. Right? You need to think about these as not being mouse pointers. They're nowhere near as precise. And so your applications have to be much, much broader in terms of space between things. The application has to have room to breathe. Right? You have to expect that the folks that are coming to you are distracted somewhat by what's going on in the world around them. They're not going to give you 100% of their focus. They will tap inadvertently. Guarantee that. In fact, one of the best apps I've ever seen is Forecast.io. And Forecast.io is a web app, and it'll run on any device. It'll work just fine on your laptop, just fine on your phone or your tablet. It's the best use of sort of that whole model I've ever seen. Now, they put a lot of time into it. This was not simple. Anybody who says, oh, it's really simple to write a web app that works on a huge range of devices, they're lying to you. One of the things they did in their testing, though, is they deliberately, through inadvertent taps, presses, swipes, etc. at the app, they tried all sorts of weird things. Let's see what happens if somebody does a triple tap with 2 fingers. What does that do? Did we handle that correctly? What happens if somebody swipes in some place we didn't expect them to swipe? They are convinced that that level of testing is what allowed them to uncover many, many, many defects that led to a much, much better experience. Right? So that's something to keep in the back of your head. There's a stat that says half of all ad clicks are mistakes, ad taps, I should say. I think that stat's wrong. I think it's probably closer to all of them, or the vast majority of them. So the challenge for us is we need to have really, really big targets. The typical smallest size possible here is 44 by 44 points. We don't talk in terms of pixels because it depends on the device. Some devices a pixel is, or a point is 2 pixels or 4 pixels or 1 pixel. So we don't care about that. We care about the points now. Now you can, in theory, shrink that down to 44 by 30, but man, that's a tiny spot. That is not a big target. And even when you do that, you have to leave space. It's one of the hardest things here is to make sure there's enough space around the attributes that people can touch a little above or a little below and they're still going to hit the right target. You have to anticipate one-handed use. Again, we can argue is that the left hand or the right hand, but it's going to be one-handed use. We have to deal with discoverability. We have this natural tension. There's all this stuff we want to try to put into these displays. There's only so much room. So we need to think about how we're going to layer that so that the most important stuff is on top, is easy to get to. The secondary stuff is truly secondary. We can't rely on gestures. For the vast majority of folks, those are just an add-on. They are a shortcut more than anything else. Right? Do not expect that your entire audience knows what the 5-finger pinch does. We need to think long and hard about capabilities. That, to me, is one of these sort of untapped aspects of this, is if we don't think about what can these devices do that our desktops can't, we failed. And so you look at Amazon, one of the things they've done with their native app, the search box, you can take a picture of a barcode and use that to do the search for you. Now, interestingly enough, some large retailers are now actually using their own custom SKUs on every item in their store to prevent people from using Amazon's app to comparison shop. So at least in some big box retailers in the US, if you go in there and try to scan a barcode of a DVD or something like that, if it's at a Best Buy or a Walmart or something like that, it's not going to show any results on Amazon because it's their own custom SKU. That's kind of crazy. Well, I'm going to pick on Delta a little bit. I travel a bit, not as much as some of my friends. I've got one friend in particular who thinks it's quaint that I've only traveled like 80,000 miles this year. That's like a slow February for him. And for better or worse, I'm on Delta hardware. There's pretty much no getting around that. Living where I do in Minneapolis, St. Paul, it's a hub for them. So pretty much anytime I'm on an airplane, it's going to be their stuff. Now, I use their website quite a bit. I'm going to show you their old website because I think it's actually quite a bit better than their current design. But there's a lot of good data here. And you could argue it's a little busy. You know, I don't love kind of all the ad things they throw at you, but I mean, that's kind of the reality of where many companies are today. You know, I'm a little annoyed that Delta likes to show me ads on their in-flight entertainment system. It's like, really, seriously, I'm a captive audience. Oh, wait, that's right, I'm a captive audience. Of course you're going to shove an ad at me. But if we look at what's available here, you know, there's some planning stuff, and that's fine, and there's some travel information stuff, you know, check-in, baggage, all that kind of stuff. The ubiquitous loyalty program, you know, what can you do with your Sky Miles, et cetera. But really the meat and potatoes of the website, you know, was this guy over here. And basically what they've done now is just kind of tilted that on the side. I don't know why it becomes now the top, but this really and truly is the meat of what they're trying to accomplish. And you'll notice that the first thing they've highlighted is not log in, it's book a trip. If it's log in, that implies, well, wait, I'm not a member of the Delta community. I don't want to log in. I just want to see what your prices are. So they've gone ahead and make, you know, for me, who always wants to log in, I have one extra click or tap, but that's acceptable. Other additional ancillary stuff, it's not super important. It's more about them selling more product, and that's fine. I never really look at that. But this gets the job done in many ways. You know, they've got various things along the bottom that most people probably ignore, and this kind of rotated up now in their new design, unfortunately. But at least in this approach, I think it was very, very obvious to see what's important. You know, those top 3 tasks kind of leap off the page at you, just on what they've got on the left side. Now, their mobile site is different, that's for sure. You know, you can argue, do I need to be able to purchase a flight on my mobile device? They've decided the answer to that today is yes. Right, they've done a revamp of their site, and I really frankly like the old one better as well. Maybe that's just me. There's certain capabilities they can take advantage on the phone, though. The phone knows where I am, so the phone can figure out when I'm in the airport, near the airport. In fact, their Passbook integration is really nice on iOS. So when I check in and I get my boarding pass, I can add it to Passbook, and so then when I get to the airport, basically it shows up on my home screen. I can swipe, and I don't have to unlock my phone to get at my ticket to scan it and get through security and whatnot. For me, the biggest use of their mobile app is checking into a flight and checking flight status. Is my flight late or not? If my flight's late, do I have another option? There's an awful lot else that goes on there, and they have actually leveraged quite a bit of phone capabilities to make it pretty useful. All right, but for me, a lot of times, I'm using this in one of 2 places: a hotel or my house before I go to the airport, and at the airport. You know, those are kind of the 2 key locations. And again, for me, the biggies are checking in, checking flight status, things of that nature. And they've done a nice job of taking advantage of the GPS chip. They've done a nice job of taking advantage of the camera as well to make it pretty full-featured. Now, this is their old app. They've changed it a little bit. Same basic structure in terms of what it provides. Now, for me, the My Trips thing is something I use a lot. You know, what do I have coming up? You know, where am I going? What are the seats? You know, things of that nature. We get a little deeper in, I can do flight search. You know, is my flight on time or not? It'd be nice if this was a little more integrated, because typically the flight I care about is the inbound flight that I'm going to end up on, and they could help me with that to say, is your inbound flight delayed or something like that, or check the status of your inbound flight. They haven't done that for me yet, unfortunately. Flight schedule is going to default to today. You know, they're pretty smart about that. Usually most of us aren't going to do too much out in the future on that kind of thing, at least from the mobile device. Now here's the bag tag thing. And what's interesting is they go ahead and they know it's me, I'm logged in, and so I don't need to type in my name, but then they take advantage of the camera. So I don't need to type in the frickin' code. I just hover my phone above the little barcode and bam, it populates it for me. Now as a seasoned traveler, I can assure you there are only 2 types of bags. There's the one in your hand, and there's the one the airline has helpfully lost. Right? That is the nature of air travel. But this does turn out to be pretty useful should you choose to check a bag. The traveling with us, what's fascinating to me here is they seem to put a premium on their fleet. And that's still true even in the current app. I'm not sure why the fleet gets such high notice, because let's be honest, you don't have a choice. It's not like when you get to the airport, you can say, I'd really like to fly on a 767 today. Can you make that happen? No, you get whatever hardware they're going to send. It just is. So that I find odd. The parking reminder is fascinating. There's 2 pieces here. One, you can take a picture and store it here of whatever was nearby. You know, most parking ramps have various, you know, colors and figures and whatnot they use to help you figure that out. But they also have a save your location button, so they can use GPS to help you find your car later. Now, ironically, my home airport is an 8-layer parking ramp. It's massive. That means I usually park on the fourth floor when I can, which means I have 4 layers of concrete between me and the sky, which means when I go ahead and hit that button, it's going to try very valiantly and then tell me, I'm sorry, I don't know where you are. Now, I don't know how a lot of other airports work because, to be honest, I don't park at any other airport than my home airport. So I'm not sure how useful that is in practice. Now, I guess if your parking lot is a ginormous field somewhere where you have open sky, maybe that's a lot more useful. But if we look at how they've structured it, clearly, my trips, yep, very important, and still is on their current app, flight status, flight schedule. And absolutely, from my standpoint, if that was all this app could do, it would be more than useful to me. Everything else is kind of ancillary. Now, they've changed the look and feel a little bit. They've revamped it to use a little different technology, so they've got a similar look and feel across their different platforms and basically one code base to make that happen. Now, I think, honestly, they've done a really nice job with their mobile platform. One of the annoyances, one of the things they added recently was what they call My Wallet. And so it keeps your Sky Miles card and your Sky Club card and all that kind of stuff in the device, which is kind of cool. Except it requires an internet connection. And I found this out the hard way. I was at Oslo. I was in Oslo. I was flying out of Oslo a few weeks ago, and I went to the club where where my Sky Club membership would get me in. And so I'm talking to the lady, and she's like, "Okay, well, I need to actually see your frequent flyer card because if you've got whatever level of flyer, then you can be in here." Well, that was in my phone, except I couldn't log into the Delta app because I didn't have an international data roaming plan. So luckily I had one of my cards buried in my backpack and could find it, and she would let me in. But it was a little annoying, to say the least. Now, I'll talk more about this tomorrow, but I'll give you kind of the 30, not even 30-second, and I hate to even sort of spoil the summary here, but it depends. All right? And I mean that. And I know that's maybe a little glib, but it's true. Now, there is an argument today that there is a little better usability with a native app. It certainly allows you to take full advantage of the features of the phone, gives you full advantage of capabilities, although some would argue that's starting to shift. As we're getting more of a design vocabulary around kind of what a mobile web app looks like, people are getting a little more comfortable with that. Now, some people will argue that a mobile website is easier. Do not assume just because you've built websites for the last 15 years that you'll be able to automatically translate all that onto a mobile phone. It isn't that simple. It might be a little easier than learning a native language, maybe, but I wouldn't use that as your predominant reason to go down that path. The moral of the story, guys, there's trade-offs, and one of the biggies, frankly, is that some of these wonderful features of the operating system don't get exposed in the browser, at least not yet. Now, some of that's shifting. There is an HTML5 sort of device API, we'll see where that goes. If you need to make money off of your app, that can be really hard to do in the web. Apple, Amazon, Google, these guys have earned people's trust. Now, ponder a third-party developer. How many of you would willingly give your credit card number to some random third party you found on the web? It depends. Some absolutely. Others, no friggin' chance. Whereas Apple, Amazon, Google, they've got your credit card information in many cases, and they will, that, okay, I'm buying through them. They are responsible for that. I don't have to worry about giving that information to someone I maybe don't trust. Discoverability is hard both ways, frankly. I mean, there's so many apps in the App Store today, depending on whose numbers you believe, we're easily north of 800,000 apps in both Play and in the Apple's ecosystem. It's really hard to get found there. There's no getting around that. The web is probably worse because there's no way to sort of curate that. It is the Wild West. Now, it's possible that the market may expect that if somebody goes to pick your favorite app store, they will find you. And if you're not there, that's a problem. And of course, you can certainly have both. Many, many, many companies do. You have to ask yourself, do we have the resources for that? All right, to sort of wrap this thing up, guys, it's a brave new world. And frankly, I'm really excited about it. I think this opens up a whole new opportunity for us, gives us a lot of interesting options. It also means there's some really hard decisions we need to make. But here's the reality. We can't ignore this. I know a lot of companies are trying. You can't. This was something we could maybe bury our head in the sands 5 years ago, 2 years ago, but not at this point. You talk about, Gretzky saying, I skate to where the puck is. Well, the puck is here now. This is where the world is. If we don't have good mobile experiences today, we're toast. Questions, comments, theories, queries? Yes, sir.
I was thinking about something you mentioned before. You said it was forecast.io.
Forecast.io? Yep.
Done like testing around inadvertent gestures. It kind of got me thinking about, I guess, in the sort of traditional desktop web browser app, that there's kind of a big issue around testability of the UI.
Sure.
I think there have been companies or people like Selenium who've tried to.
Right. How do we test a web app?
Yeah, but
Yep.
I don't think there's, I don't think things like that have ever, I don't think they've ever come up like a silver bullet for that sort of thing. I imagine that if you're sort of trying to support mobile apps, whether it's native apps across multiple devices or whether it's like a mobile web app that's supported, I imagine it kind of becomes even more important. The testability of the UI probably becomes a lot more difficult as well.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering if you've got any.
How do we test it?
Yeah.
Oh, man, it's a pain. There's no getting around it. So a certain amount of testing can be done on simulators, and that's reasonable. Do not expect simulators to be silver bullets. You eventually have to test these on mobile devices. Right? So the way we do this, we've kind of, as an organization, made a decision about here are the 8 to 10 devices that we need to target, based on what's coming into our logs. What are the most popular devices, and that gets looked at every few months to make sure we're not way off base, and it's what you would expect. It's a couple iPhones, iPad, a Kindle Fire, ironically enough, makes the cut. No BlackBerry, interestingly enough. I think there's one Windows device that we target, but I mean it's a fairly small set of kit, and the expectation is that a given mobile project, you get a box of devices that you can use to do your own local developer, local QA kind of stuff. The next level up from that, though, can involve a lab. And so various companies, and we're in the process of purchasing access to somebody's lab, but they have these mobile labs where, and I don't completely understand how this works. I've asked for demos and still haven't gotten one. But essentially, they have racks and racks of devices plugged into the internet. And using some kind of a browser interface, you can create test scripts that you can launch. And so you can basically say, all right, test my app across this matrix of devices, go. And then you get results back. I mean, that's the theory. Now, I have not put that into practice yet because we haven't signed any contracts. But that's how we're sort of targeting that the groups have a set of devices, and they may augment that based on their specific needs. One of our groups has a little different approach for who they need to target, and so they have a couple other devices they've tacked onto that little kit. So that's kind of a shifting target. But the idea there is developer does their baseline testing there and make sure it's happy. Customers might do a little bit of acceptance testing there as well. And then for anything that's bigger, in terms of that overall matrix, that would be something we would ship to the proverbial cloud to do. So good question, though. It's hard. I mean, if you guys thought that developing for like Netscape and IE was a pain in the ass, I pine for those days. Because inevitably, here's what happens. Oh, it worked fine on the simulator, but then we got it on the physical device, and it didn't. And then it works on the iPad 2, but for some reason it didn't work on the iPad 3, and it doesn't work at all on Nexus 7, and you're just like and it sucks. So, other questions or comments? All right, cool. Well, there's drinks that way, and I'll answer your question once we disappear here. There are drinks that way. I recommend we take advantage of that, and thanks for spending some time with me. I appreciate it. So, thank you.